Hi, and welcome to the tourism unit. In this unit of the course, we're going to deal with the industry of tourism. It's a really important industry to understand because, for one reason, it's the third largest employment sector on Earth when you consider the total number of people employed. So there's loads of employment opportunities in it, and for that reason, it's important. We're going to start off with a brief introductory lesson on what is tourism. But then we're going to move into a series of case studies. Each case study will deal with the causes of recent trends in tourism. What that means is what has caused the recent changes to take place in the tourism industry. We'll then deal with the impacts of those changes. How have they affected people and the environment? And they'll then deal with the solutions to those changes. And what that means is how we manage those impacts into the future. Okay, so first of all, what is tourism? Well, a simple definition is that you are a tourist when you spend more than 24 hours or less than a year in another place for either business or leisure. You don't have to be going on holiday to be a tourist, you just have to be spending a significant period of time in another location, contributing towards that location's economy. It's one of the world's largest economic sectors, and it takes many, many forms. Now, what I'm about to present to you is just a few examples of the kinds of tourism that exist. It's certainly not all of them, because there are lots and lots. One of the really important ones that we will learn about is mass tourism. And this occurs where large numbers of people visit one area. And the picture you see on the screen there is a good kind of introductory image to what mass tourism looks like. It has its impacts on the environment and people in the areas where it takes place, and there are methods of managing those impacts. Ecotourism is the second of the important case studies we'll look at. And it caters for tourists who want to experience something more natural. They want to have less of a damaging footprint upon the environments that they visit. And perhaps they even want to contribute something meaningful to the areas that they visit. So it's a much more responsible form of tourism that tries to give back to the places that are visited. These are going to be the two main case studies that you'll earn marks for. But it's worth knowing a little bit more about tourism. There are loads more types. Adventure tourism, for example. This is a type of tourism where people deliberately seek out dangerous, adventurous activities. And people will pay good money to have experts show them where to go and how to take part in those activities. Tourism does have its darker sides as well. Drug tourism is defined as people traveling purposely to an area to obtain drugs that they're unable to due to them being illegal in their own home countries. This often takes advantage of countries that don't have such a strong legal structure and perhaps aren't in such a good position to enforce abidance of the law. And it's very much the responsibility of the tourist to be the law-abiding party and to act responsibly. Another sad example of how tourism has a darker side is in sex tourism. And this is where, again, tourists may deliberately seek out areas of the world where regulation and the law authorities are unable to enforce the protection of their own citizens, and people are known to take advantage of that. So these are not case studies that we'll be dealing with in any great detail, perhaps thankfully, but it is important to realise when we talk about tourism, this unit is not simply about going on holiday. This unit is about a very large, meaningful, serious industry that makes trillions of dollars every year. It's one of the world's largest employers, and it has its good sides and it has its bad sides. This simple graph gives you some introduction to some of the other kind of terms that we might use. We might talk about inbound and outbound tourism. These are types of tourism, but they don't define the kind of tourist that you are. So an outbound tourist is simply somebody who, for example, a UK citizen who visits somewhere overseas. And an inbound tourist is simply somebody who lives overseas, who visits the UK. And you can see in those two graphs that the rates of people taking holidays outside of Britain from the UK are greater than those inbound. Furthermore, we might use the term domestic tourism. This is where you take a holiday or a business trip in your own country. And finally, we have international tourism, and that's where people take holidays around the globe. And one of the really massive factors that has seen an explosion in people traveling around the globe is the process of globalization, which has made it easier to cross borders, easier to get flights around the world. It's made it more affordable. It's made the language that we speak around the world it's made it much more easy for people to communicate with each other around the world. The internet's a great example of that. And as a result, people have become more and more adventurous in the locations that they seek to travel to. So travel and tourism is a global industry. Tourism is international. Tourism can also be domestic. It can be inbound to your country, or it can be outbound when you leave your country. And it has numerous forms. Mass tourism and ecotourism are the two that we will focus on. Okay, so let's get started with our first case study, which is on mass tourism in Spain. We need to know what the causes of mass tourism are, what are its impacts, and what the solutions to managing those impacts are. Those are the three questions that you need to prepare for. So let's get stuck into the first one. So mass tourism in Spain, what does that look like? Well, for a start, it's useful to know something about Spain. In Barcelona, one of our focus case studies on the east coast of Spain, there's beautiful architecture. This is the Casa Batlló, which is a design style which is typical of the area. The Sagrada Familia is a world-famous architectural masterpiece, as yet unfinished and still hundreds of years old, and it's still being built. It's an amazing building to go and see, and one of the world's most visited buildings. And again, that's in Barcelona. But we won't just be focusing on the city of Barcelona, we'll also be looking at elsewhere in Spain. For example, Cathedral Beach, which you can see has some amazing natural arches that people like to go and see for its natural beauty. But also there's numerous other sites, and I don't have time to go through all the famous sites that are in Spain, and I'm sure that you'll have time in class to do that. But here's Park Güell, which is a famous beauty spot in the city of Barcelona. There are lots and lots of national parks in Spain. This is Doñana National Park. There's adventure tourism going on in Spain as well. This is the Caminito del Rey. It's a famous kind of high wire adventure walk along cliff sides. Apparently, a small number of people actually die doing this every year, but I imagine that adds to the sense of fun. More famously, perhaps, I've deliberately started with some examples that you might not have been so familiar with, but more famously, Spain has many beautiful beaches. And this is a familiar image that you might recognize of Magaluf. And here are the Balearic Islands. Balearic Islands include famously, of course, Ibiza, but also Mallorca and Menorca. Interesting fact, Menorca is called Menorca because it is the minor of the Balearic Islands, and Mallorca is called Mallorca because it is the major of the Balearic Islands. Major meaning big and minor meaning small. And you can see that there's all sorts of tourist attractions on the islands. Aqualand, the Forestal Park, Marine Land, Jungle Park, all sorts of things for people to go and see and do. Having a few examples of these is really useful for your answers. So Spain is a beautiful, varied, interesting, sunny location, and for that reason, it attracts people to go on holiday. So here's our first question. Mass tourism has increased since the 1950s, with many locations experiencing record numbers of visitors. Give reasons for the increase in mass tourism. That's what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to explain why mass tourism has increased in recent years in Spain. Well, one of the reasons is people want to experience something different. They want to go to places where there's different cultures and new adventures. And Spain certainly has that variety. It's got lots of different places to go and see. There's no shortage. Whereas traditionally people might have just gone to their local beach for a holiday. People want some variety now, and they're willing to pay for it. This is the beautiful World Heritage City of Bilbao, and it is, as you can see, stunning. This is very much linked to globalization. The fact that people want different cultures and new adventures is linked to the fact that they are also enabled in going to all of those places. This map shows all of the international travel flight paths, and you can see that it's a very dense map, and there are lots and lots of carriers taking lots and lots of people to international destinations. It's estimated that at any one time there are 500,000 people flying currently in the air. And that is quite a staggering statistic. TV travel shows are another thing that accounts for the rise of mass tourism. Not only have we been enabled by the presence of cheap airline flights, not only have our tastes changed because we want a more varied experience, but also the whole industry is geared towards advertising towards us. So there's lots of TV travel shows and social media which inspires us to visit foreign locations. So where in the past people might not have thought about Spain, now they think about Spain as something a bit different. They think about it as something they've seen on TV, and they think about it as something that's accessible to them because there's easy flights there. Spain itself has massively improved its road, rail and air travel networks over the last 30 to 40 years. And as you can see from this map, which is just available airports, there's a lot of opportunities to fly into Spain. And that encourages, of course, lots of tourists to go. Tour operators who kind of sort everything for you. They organize your flights, they organize your holiday accommodation, they may even organize activities for you. They kind of make it easy to go on holiday. Maybe you don't speak Spanish, but you don't have to because you can buy all of the bits you need here on a website. And these often are called package deals. And this encourages people who might otherwise have been a bit not confident enough to go on holiday, not confident enough to organize it. This encourages those kind of people to go on holiday. And that, of course, adds to the number of people who are going to Spain on holiday. Budget airlines. I've just spoken about package holidays and companies that organize that for you, but a separate point here is the relatively recent business model that is the budget airline. Budget airlines have existed from, I confess I don't know, but maybe 20, 30 years in their current form. And companies such as EasyJet make holidays affordable because you can get very cheap flights. And that is another reason why people are going on holiday to places in greater numbers, because they can take advantage of cheap air flight deals. Another factor that's encouraged people to go on holiday is just the fact that we have more time off work. Bank holidays and public holidays mean that people have the time to go on holiday. And people also get holiday pay, and they can afford to take time off work for a break. Now, these seem like obvious points, but they're not actually guaranteed. And it's not all countries in the world that provide bank holidays and holiday pay. And indeed, conditions around the world, even amongst the more developed nations, vary, as you can see on the graphic in front of you. Compare different countries, and you'll see the differences in the level of public holiday and extra paid holidays that they get. But nonetheless, the fact that governments and employers provide paid holiday time to people means that has created an entire industry, the tourism industry. So it's a combination of factors. We've got flights being available, we've got flights being cheap, we've got package holiday companies, we've got a kind of change in attitudes as people want a bit more variety and excitement. And all of these things together have caused the rise of mass tourism. So that leads us to look at what the effects of mass tourism are, what its impacts are. Now here I'm really going to focus in detail, as much as possible, on one place to make it easier for you to revise. I'm going to look at Barcelona, principally Barcelona. Before we do that, though, the first picture I've shown you isn't in Barcelona, which is ideal. But one of the impacts of mass tourism is raising the awareness of local culture and traditions. When we go on holiday, we learn a little bit about the place. And a good example of that is the running of the bulls in Pamplona. And it's worth finding out about on your own time. Go and research it for yourself. It's a fascinating event. But tourists like to get involved in the activities, and a few tourists get hurt every year, which perhaps serves them right. I don't know. It's up to you. But raising awareness of local culture is a really important point about going on holiday. Mass tourism also raises international awareness of the natural environment. For example, people go to national parks. This is Doñana National Park, which I've mentioned before, and it has World Wildlife Fund status. And people go there to see migratory birds land, such as the flamingos you see in the picture. Notice, I'll just pause here in my commentary, notice the detail that you're scoring marks for. I should have probably pointed that out in the previous answer as well. You need to be developing these sentences, and especially in this part of the course, you need case study examples, and you need to be able to provide them with confidence. So when you're copying down the notes in the yellow boxes, try to, remember that you don't need to remember every single note. That's not the intention. Instead, I'm trying to provide you with enough information that you can pick and choose on the bits that are most memorable to you. But you will need to write in this level of detail. This that you see in front of you is the expectation. Okay, so mass tourism also provides work and opportunities for local people. I'm sorry, the screen does say ecotourism there. That's a typo by me. That's my fault. It should say mass tourism. People work in all sorts of sectors. For example, you might work in local bars, clubs. You might be a tour guide. You might work in a local tourist shop. In fact, almost all local businesses are impacted by tourists because tourists go into so many local businesses and shops. Your shop doesn't have to be directly selling something to tourists. You could just be selling clothes, but tourists still like to go clothes shopping on holiday. So many businesses find themselves part of the tourism industry. And so tourism provides work opportunities for local people. It improves their standard of living and it encourages local business. It's not all good news. Some tourists feel, especially in cities like Barcelona, that they're losing their cultural identity. And what that means is that they feel that their traditional culture of their area is being eroded. As more companies adapt to the tastes of tourists, more local culture is pushed out. So For example, Barcelona has rules on allowing companies like McDonald's to locate wherever they want in Barcelona, because they feel that that's actually the tourists are bringing that industry in, and they want to resist that. They want to keep their own cultural identity, which is perfectly understandable. The graffiti in the picture here I quite like. It translated roughly, it means speak Galician to tourists. Galician's the local dialect. And it tells you something about the attitude that some people have in Barcelona towards tourists. Certainly not all. But that attitude is reflected in some of the other pictures I'll show you later on in these lessons, where there is a certain feeling of tourists aren't necessarily welcome all of the time because they do have negative impacts. So far, mass tourism is bringing jobs and employment and money to areas. It's also allowing us to learn about other people's cultures and to help support their naturally beautiful areas like the Dinana National Park. But also, there's friction. Tourists can cause the local culture of an area to be lost. Some areas feel as if they're not for locals anymore because it's almost purely it's purely tourists in the area. For example, in Barcelona, your teacher might show you maps in class of the Gothic quarter of Barcelona. This used to be a traditional area of local shops and flats, but now it's exclusively high-priced tourist facilities, and a lot of the flats are rented out to tourists for a lot higher rent than they would have been to locals. A parallel example in Scotland is near the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, which is the kind of older Gothic quarter of Edinburgh, and the businesses there are almost exclusively geared towards tourism. Consequently, prices tend to be higher, and certainly a lot of the flats are rented to tourists, not locals. Nonetheless, the point that we're making here is that some people feel that certain areas of the city are not even for the locals anymore. They're for the tourists, and that's obviously a shame for the people who are from Barcelona. And you can see this sticker. Those stickers are quite common around the city as people express their discontent with mass tourism. A more simple point, mass tourism causes pollution. Tourists often don't respect the fact that they're in somebody else's home, somebody else's area, and this causes littering on the beaches, littering in public areas and parks. This picture is from Barcelona and shows mass tourism can mean that property is rented out. Now, that means that if you own a flat, you would rent it to tourists that are visiting. And the reason you would do that is because you can charge more money than you would make from renting your flat to a local Barcelona citizen. And this means that it makes it difficult for people living in Barcelona to find accommodation. And you can see the sign there, tourists stay at hotels, the apartments are for living in. And for people to go to the trouble to put that sign up tells you a lot about how important these issues are to the people that live there. Another image here, I think, really reinforces this point. A kind of passive-aggressive notice there saying, welcome tourists. Because of you, many local residents are forced to move out. Enjoy your stay. But nonetheless, it's an important point and helps to illustrate it. Tourists can also act in an antisocial way. For example, poor behaviour by stag weekend parties in Barcelona. And Barcelona has actually taken action to limit the influence of stag weekends and things like that. Groups of tourists acting antisocially, perhaps drinking too much, especially if they're younger groups, they create a lot of noise. And maybe it's Tuesday night and they don't care about that because they're on holiday, but all the locals will really be bothered by that. Maybe they act in an intimidating way. Maybe they are, shouting and swearing in the streets or just acting disrespectfully. And these things are things that people just can't live with. And when you're a tourist in someone else's country, it's really important to try and live by their cultural standards. And some people have not learned that lesson. Mass tourism can also increase the rates of petty crime, such as pickpocketing. This street in the photo is called Las Ramblas in Barcelona, and it's infamous for pickpocketing. There are notices and signs, and they have police on patrol, but nonetheless, it stands to reason that the pickpocketing happens because there is such an influx of and density of people. It makes it easy for the crime to take place. And so that's another impact of mass tourism. People living in Barcelona don't want to live with pickpocketing as something that their city is known for, and mass tourism brings that to their city. Some areas of Spain, it being a very quite a hot country, are water scarce, as you can see on the map. Water scarcity mapped using the scale on the bottom. You can see that the most water scarce areas, and Barcelona is up here, Madrid in the center, and tourists increase water consumption. In fact, tourists increase water consumption more than locals because they tend to use things like swimming pools and water parks. Their hotel rooms tend to see more shower usage than a normal person's house would. If you think about how you use the facilities of your hotel, that tends to be true. And as a result, tourists force water consumption up in already water-starved areas. Okay, so how do we manage these problems? How do we solve them? Well, in Barcelona, they've been really quite forward-thinking in how they've tried to tackle these problems. There was a 2020 strategic plan. It has 10 elements designed to tackle the problems that mass tourism brings. Now, I'd remind you again, folks, you should be pausing the videos, like you should be pausing to copy down the parts that are written with an orange background, making sure you've, of course, got the correct title from the screen. And it's not my intention that you would learn every single one of these notes. Instead, learn the ones that appeal to you and kind of stick in your memory. So this is a 10-part plan, but I don't mean that you should learn every one of the 10 steps. Nonetheless, Barcelona has a 2020 strategic plan. Let's see what they've done to try and tackle things. Well, the first thing they've done is urban planning laws. These laws cut down on the amount of flats that are rented to tourists. You need to have a permit to rent tourist accommodation, and the government has suspended processing these. They've actually said, no more, we're taking a break, we're not increasing the amount of tourist accommodation. And that helps to limit the numbers of people. You might wonder, why do you want to limit the numbers of people? Because surely more people means more money. But actually, if a place becomes too busy, then that will actually make the appeal of the area drop. What you want to do is strike a balance between the right number of tourists and the area becoming overbusy. Because if you hit that balance, the tourists that are there will spend more money because they are enjoying the area to a greater degree. They've given preferential access to some areas. Earlier in this lesson, I showed you Park Güell. It's in Barcelona. It has an €8 entry fee for tourists. Local residents have unrestricted and free access. And that's a good way of helping locals still have access to their own culture. There have been a lot of focus group discussions between the tourism sector and local communities. Making sure this kind of communication takes place is really important because it makes local people feel that their views are being taken seriously. And it is really important. If you ignore the views of local people, well, local people will find ways of letting their views be known, as you've seen in the pictures I've just shown you, where people are putting up signs that are deliberately geared to make tourists feel unwelcome. And if you Google search anti-tourist graffiti in Barcelona, you will find far more strongly worded examples than the ones I've included in this presentation. Spatial dispersal is the catchy name of the next solution. Basically, what this map shows you is Barcelona, and it is a heat map, a bit like you get on Match of the Day. It's a heat map that shows where people are most active, and what they're aiming to do is to spread the heat of tourist activity across the city to kind of dilute it. And they do that by deliberately citing new tourist opportunities in areas that are further out from the centre. This concentration down here is the long street I mentioned earlier, Las Ramblas. And what they've done is deliberately build tourist attractions further out from these areas. And this encourages this concentration of people to spread more widely and reduce their impact. It's actually quite a clever solution. Now, this is not in Barcelona, but it is a really good example. This is site hardening. This is when, if you've got paths and trails, this is the Camino del Rey, which is in Malaga. They toughen the pathways with wooden boards, as you can see, or grit or gravel or concrete. And this stops footpath erosion. It stops people damaging the land as they walk over it. Back to Barcelona, another strategy they do is to forecast visitor numbers. Like a weather forecast, what they do is they try and keep track of the number of people coming into the city. When it gets to a kind of cut-off line at 70,000, the calendar shows red, and residents can then avoid congested areas. Or indeed, they can avoid the city altogether. They can just kind of get out. Just to give you some context on that, in September 2018, there were 3 days where there was over 200,000 visitors in the city. I mean, that's massive. And I mean, we're talking there, Edinburgh has a population of 500,000. Imagine if you added another 200,000. Well, during Edinburgh's Fringe Festival, we see similar spikes in population. So this is something that you might be able to relate to. Barcelona has also taken action by moving coach parks and bus routes to change the way that tourists move through the city. Kind of sending buses and coach tours on more longer loops through the outskirts of the city. They've also pedestrianised areas, as you can see here. This is Las Ramblas again. And it makes these areas not only impossible for cars to enter, which is a good thing because it reduces congestion, but it makes it safer for the mass tourist numbers. It also makes it more pleasant, too, for local people. Again, another non-Barcelona example, seasonal pricing. This basically helps match supply and demand. This is Cathedrals Beach. I mentioned it before. You might kind of get an idea why they call it Cathedrals Beach with these amazing archways. And they basically have a number capping system. So you have to book to go, but once you hit a certain number, no more people can go to the beach. So they just limit the number of people that are allowed to go. And that's really important. Cracking down on stag nights and hen do's is something I mentioned. It took me a long time to find a picture that was anyway appropriate. So I've taken this old Guardian headline. If you do your own Google research here, you'll find far more inappropriate behaviour by tourists. This stops what in Barcelona is known, and you'll have to forgive my poor Spanish, as Turismo de Borrachera. And this is when, I love this, it's travelling to another place to behave in ways you would not do when in a place where you are known. And I think that's a really good way of understanding the problem with antisocial behaviour. In this story, these two tourists have, for some reason, decided to be naked in the street. And there was, I mean, it's just not in the culture of the area. And quite rightly, the locals were really hacked off about it. I mean, they've got families and kids that live in the area. Nobody needs to be waking up to that. And so there was real protests. And that protest movement continues today. And so they have been cracking down on stag nights and hen dos. And here's a nice, slightly more simplified way of understanding it. Basically, what they've done is they've banned happy hour. So there's a period in the evening when drinks are more cheaply priced to encourage people in, basically, and they've banned that. And that makes, therefore, binge drinking less affordable, and then it puts off young groups of lads and lasses coming over and acting inappropriately. Also, they've applied a tourist tax. This means that when you arrive, and typically when you pay for your accommodation, you have to pay a tax as well. And that tax is as per night. You have to pay extra just for the pleasure of staying in Spain or in Barcelona. And tourist taxes are increasingly common around the world, actually. And they are a major way of raising money to help build things like pedestrianised areas in Las Ramblas and to pay for specialist police to stop pickpockets and so on. Okay, in the next lesson, I'm going to deal with ecotourism in Costa Rica. So make sure that you've reviewed this full lesson, please. Make sure you've copied down the notes and make sure you've got all the correct headings in place. See you next time.